Steve's fingers tapped relentlessly on the small table, keeping time with the music drifting from the jukebox. His eyes scanned the noisy room, observing the people sitting and chatting. The pub was half full that night, like his glass of beer. He took a deep breath in and exhaled slowly. "God," he groaned, leaning back in his chair and dragging on his last cigarette of the night, which enveloped him in a sea of blue haze. 10 minutes earlier, he had been in the spotlight, standing in his usual corner, performing with his guitar, trying to reach the hearts and minds of the people before they went home. He had played well tonight, and he was confident his guitar always hit the right notes. But hardly anyone looked up. They continued chatting amongst themselves. He knew his music had become mere background noise, its melodies and lyrics falling on deaf ears. Steve was a struggling musician, and he had adopted the name the Scarecrow, mostly because people said he looked like one. He admitted he was thin and gawky, with a mop of black tousled hair, faded blue jeans, and a red check shirt. But he liked the name, so he incorporated it into his stage act. He had even made a wooden nameplate, which he placed beside him when performing. "Steve the Scarecrow," it read. Now it rested against his glass of beer as he took another puff of his cigarette. The pub door opened and a cold chill swept through the room. He looked up and smiled as he saw his friend Mike approaching. Mike pulled up a chair and sat down beside him. "How did it go?" he asked. "It can only get better," Steve replied wearily. He nodded casually toward the people in the bar. "Look at them. Wrong sort of crowd for what I've got to offer. What I need is an audience that appreciates music, not this typical Saturday night lot. You know the type?" "Yeah, I know what you mean," said Mike. "But you've been bashing out the same old stuff for a long time. Why don't you change your style? Adopt a new image. Try something different." "Possibly," Steve pondered. "You mean ditch my Elton John and 50s rock and roll covers?" Mike laughed. "The songs are good, don't get me wrong, and you're pretty good at playing them. But so is everyone else around here. Even at the King's Arms, just up the road, there's some guy bashing out the same old stuff. Yeah, try something different." The landlord made his way over to Steve and Mike. "What would you like to drink, Mike?" he asked. "Hi, Dave. A nice pint of real ale would go down a treat. And while you're at it, any more of that casserole you had the other night? I'll have some if it's still available." The landlord nodded in the affirmative and was about to return to the bar when he turned back to Steve. "You played well tonight, Steve. Shall I book you in for next weekend?" Steve hesitated, glanced at Mike, then looked back at the landlord. "No, not next weekend. I'll let you know when I'm available again. I'm thinking of taking a break for a week or two, but I'll be in touch." The landlord nodded and returned to the bar. Mike looked at Steve. "So, what are you going to do then?" he asked. "I might take you up on your offer," said Steve. "Let me think about a new style. If I can write a couple of new songs, I'll come around tomorrow night. You can tell me what you think." "Sounds good to me." "Okay, I'll see you then. Oops, here comes the landlord with my food." Steve got up from the table and put on his coat and scarf. "See you tomorrow then, and enjoy the food." The next day dawned on the old city, with the wintry sun lighting up the once darkened shadows. Grimy brickwork and wet roads, everything looked grey, as if drained of colour. Soon, the hustle and bustle of life would spill out from tired houses, and everything would be different. But for an hour at least, there was a stillness in the air. Steve, in his room, laid down his notepad and pen, put his hands behind his head, and smiled. He hadn't slept since arriving home, and it was now 7 a.m. He was dying to crawl between the sheets and get some rest, but knowing he had written 3 good songs made the tiredness worthwhile. Elton John and 50s rock and roll, goodbye, he said to himself. 12 hours later, Steve was walking through the old part of town, where houses old and new were piled closely together, leaning toward the riverbank. The grey waters lapped against the banks of a little creek where Mike had his apartment. Steve climbed the rickety old stairs of Mike's residence and knocked on the door. It opened. "Come in," said Mike. "I see you've brought your guitar." "Of course. Didn't I tell you I was going to play you my new music?" Steve laughed. Steve walked into the apartment and before long was giving Mike a demo of his new songs. Mike listened with interest as Steve played. He was quite surprised. He liked them and Steve's new style. See the young lady with the golden hair, making her way to the English fair. She was rich and he was poor, soon be knocking at her door. The song, light and airy and full of old English phrases, drifted around the room and out the window. "Folk music," Mike said. "Well, that's a turn up for the books, the universal language of Old England." "Did you know," Steve said, "that folk music is a tradition-based form of music that has existed since medieval times, passed on orally within village communities?" "So you've done your research too," Mike said. "Sure have," Steve said excitedly, "and that's exactly where I'm going with this." He walked to the window and pointed outside. Steve paused, turned to Mike, and spoke again. "Out there," he said, gesturing, "back to the old communities, where it all began. If my music is going to mean anything, it has to be listened to by people with a deep sense of community. Farmers, old men, young men and women of the village." Mike thought for a moment. "So, what's the plan?" he asked. "I'm going away next week for a 2 or 3 week holiday," Steve said. "What I'm going to do is find a village somewhere, maybe in a remote area of the country, and stay for a while. I'll get to know the locals and see if I can find a village inn or two that doesn't mind live music." "Sounds good," Mike said. "Within a week," Steve continued, "I should have at least 10 new songs. I'll get them recorded quickly, put them onto a CD, and take the old portable CD player with me. You never know, I might even be able to sell a few of them." Mike laughed. "Well, before you go, let me know where you're headed. If the weather's good, I could even come up and join you." "No problem," said Steve. "It would be good to have some company. After a while, even fresh air and country life might get old. But I need to find the place first, and then I'll let you know." A week passed, and the great day had come. Steve loaded up his car with his music equipment and his collection of 10 new folk songs. He was going to wow them when he got there, and if successful, he could already envision the grand tour, playing at villages, fetes, and maybe even a village concert. With a smiling heart, he headed out of the city. He had decided to drive westwards, for there lay a vast expanse of countryside. One part of it held a remote and desolate moor, divided by a valley and wooded hills. Each region had its own historical rustic roots and pastoral elegance, and within this landscape existed tiny villages, hamlets and solitary houses that kept their own secrets. Farmhouses, empty barns, ploughed fields, dark hedges and high tors looked out over the barren terrain. Besides the constant wind, the only other sound was the birds, their incessant squawking. The silence, when the wind didn't blow and the birds stopped playing their own little tunes, was indeed deafening. The car drove on through the morning and into the afternoon, and it was around 4 p.m. when he finally stopped on an old muddy road. The road itself was narrow but elevated, fairly high, with a vast expanse of fir trees crowning the summit. Further down and to his left lay a valley, not too deep, and reachable either by car or on foot for those who wished to explore. The cold wind had begun to pick up, and his body shivered as it penetrated his coat. A mist, far in the distance, was slowly rolling along the valley floor, compounding the chill. "It's about time I found that village. What was it called?" "Oh yes, here it is," as he opened up a map and looked closely at it. "Hell's Bottom," he laughed to himself. "Well, that sure does beat the biscuit. I've not heard of a village called that before." He laughed again and threw the map onto the back seat. "Just down this road, and it should be signed to the left," he said. And when I get there, I better contact Mike, as I never did tell him where I was going. He started the engine and drove slowly forward, down the road where the mist was already waiting for him. The mist was dense, but his headlights shone through the white like two beams from a lighthouse. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes. As to the left of him, he noticed a narrow road with a weathered sign reading, "Hell's Bottom." "That's it," he said, and he turned left and made his way along the narrow road, slowly edging his way down a hill and desperately trying to avoid the rutted surface. He noticed to the left and right of him furrowed fields where crops were growing, but most were devoid of any vegetation, as if fallen to a foul disease. Hundreds of birds were scattered over the ground as far as the eye could see, and in the distance he could see shadowy people, like matchstick men, running and shouting, trying to scare them into flight. Suddenly, as if a large black cloak was lifted off the earth, the birds flew up. It was a murmuration. 1,000 heartbeats mixed with the flapping of wings, sounding almost like a wounded animal, screeching and crying as they flew overhead. His eyes turned back quickly to the road which ran through the trees. Branches met overhead and formed a dark tunnel, and the darkness seemed to swallow him up. Eventually, the trees began to thin out, and the mist began to clear as he finally drove into the village. The first thing he noticed was that the village looked medieval. It had a village green, a well for drinking water, stables for horses, a stream for fishing, a blacksmith, a carpenter's house, and the all-important inn, where people could drink away their problems. The inn was where he intended to stay. He had written ahead to request accommodation, but never received a reply from the landlord. At the time, he'd wondered why he couldn't simply call. There was a telephone number, but the line crackled so badly that the voice on the other end sounded distant and indistinct. It was nearly impossible to make out what was being said. To compound matters, a strange whistling accompanied the call, reminiscent of an old folk tune he'd once heard. The conversation was futile, but he shrugged it off as mere atmospherics. The area was so remote, he reasoned, that a place like this could bend the signal to its will. He stopped the car outside the inn, grabbed his bag and guitar, and made his way to the door. By now, the light was fading fast, and the whole village was shrouded in deepening shadows. He noticed, too, that there were no lights anywhere, a most singular observation. The only sound he could hear was someone coughing further down the road. He pushed open the door of the inn and stepped inside. The room was a large space with a half-light that came mostly from a roaring fire in the hearth, although a number of oil lanterns and candles were scattered about. The air was thick with the smell of crackling pork, as well as various other odors. Smoke from the cooking hovered in the hot, noisy air. Villagers sat at little wooden tables and benches, eating and supping ale. He noticed some sitting on the floor on straw bales, while chickens and piglets screeched in little pens tucked away in the corners of the room. Steve's eyes began to sting as the smoke from the fire reached him. A blue haze was everywhere. A man appeared from the bar area and approached him. He was dressed in what appeared to be woolen clothing, with a woolen tunic belted at the waist, and also a cloak and a brooch. The material was quite colorful to the eye. On his legs, he wore woolen leggings fastened with cross-gartered leather strips. He looked positively medieval. Steve looked around him, and everyone, with a few exceptions, wore similar clothing. "It must be fancy dress," Steve muttered to himself. "Hail, fellow, well met," the man said with a slight bow. "Come hither, I am the landlord." The man spoke a kind of English, but with a slight French-Dutch accent. He beckoned Steve to a small table by the fire and gave him soup in a large wooden bowl with copious amounts of bread. The other villagers had all stopped eating and drinking and were staring. The room had suddenly become quiet except for the grunting of the piglets and the loud crackles from the fire. Steve started to feel uneasy. His first instinct was to make his excuses and run for the door to get the hell out of there, but he hesitated. "Eat! Belly timber! Ale!" the landlord roared at the villagers. They quickly ignored Steve, returning to their raucous conversations, eating and drinking. "Belly timber?" Steve asked, his brow furrowed. "Aye, belly timber. Food, you know," the landlord explained. "This lot are all pitch-kettled." "Oh, right," Steve said, still looking puzzled. "You'll be all right here," the landlord assured him. "If you need a room, we have plenty." Steve nodded in agreement and explained as best he could that he needed a week's accommodation. After they agreed on terms, the landlord left him and engaged in conversation with a woman perched on a stool at the far end of the bar. Steve glanced at her, and she smiled, revealing a set of rotten teeth. She was clearly drunk. Her clothes were potted with stains and rips, reeking of stale ale. "Don't you think I look beauteous?" she slurred. As she attempted to stand, she promptly fell backward, knocking herself unconscious on the floor. Steve started to jump up, but the landlord pushed him back down. "Don't you worry about her. William John," the landlord shouted to two men at a nearby table. "Get hold of her and put her in the horse trough. She'll soon wake up." The two men hoisted the woman out of the door. Steve, with a shake of his head, continued with his meal before retiring for the night. His bedroom was basic, containing only a small wooden trestle table with a wooden bowl and a large jug of water beside it. The bed, stuffed with straw, was surprisingly comfortable. He soon fell into a deep sleep. The next day, Steve awoke to the sounds of roosters crowing and the light of the sun streaming through the window. He struggled to get up, had a quick wash from the wooden bowl, dressed, and made his way downstairs. The inn looked better in the daylight. There was no sign of anyone except a maid cleaning and sweeping. It was warm, though, like a summer's day, and a complete contrast to the cold weather he'd experienced on the way there. He opened the inn door and stepped outside, met by a bustling scene of sights and sounds, people going about their business, market stalls selling all different types of wares, and attracting crowds and tradesmen. Sheep were being herded across the road, and children and animals played together. "Good morrow," said an elderly lady as she passed him by. "Good morning," said Steve. He spent most of the day exploring the area. He stayed within the boundaries of Hell's Bottom and didn't venture far from the village, as he noticed that the mist always clung to the outskirts. At one point, he decided to walk back down the road that led towards the valley from which he had originally come, only to hit a wall of mist. Inside the mist, it was cold and dank, with no sound, and as he attempted to walk through, he quickly backed away as the mist wrapped around him like a cloak. He got himself back on the warmer side. His mobile phone couldn't pick up a Wi-Fi signal in the village, but as soon as he approached the mist, it slowly began to receive one. In fact, the more he walked into the mist, the stronger the signal became. "Hi, Mike," Steve said. "Can you hear me?" He was standing next to the mist, half in and half out, making the call when a voice sounded on the other side. "Steve, is that you?" Mike said. "Sure is. You'll have to speak up as the signal here is dire." The signal carried both voices into the ether and then back again, fading in and out before it finally stabilized. "Listen," Steve said. "I'm at a place called Hell's Bottom, and I've just sent you my location. Hopefully you'll get it. It's trying to send now. I can't believe this place. It's amazing. Everything is so old, as if it stepped out of a history book 1,000 years ago. You'll have to come down." Mike interrupted him. "I've got your location. It just came through. Okay, I can't get down just yet, but I will drive over this weekend. Keep your phone on and charged. I'll see you in a few days." "Okay," said Steve. "I'm performing tonight in the inn, so when you come down, I'll have a lot to tell you, I'm sure." The voices faded off into the ether again, and Steve terminated the call and made his way back up the road and into the village. The day was getting hotter, and sweat had broken out on his forehead. He felt clammy and warm. When he arrived at the village green, he noticed a large crowd of people, maybe 20 or 30, surrounding a raised wooden platform that was littered with fruit and vegetables. The amount of food was negligible. The crowd, he noticed, were praying, and he saw a parson on the side leading the prayers. Some were on their knees, hands clasped together. Some were wailing, but many were just silent as if in despair. The birds, high in the sky, were circling and creating a din with their incessant crowing. This reminded him of the large flocks of birds he saw when he first drove through the valley. The fields had been covered with them, and the trees had turned black with their little bodies. He remembered the mass flight of all of them when the farmers, a dozen or more, with long poles thrashed the branches and trees to frighten them. The food is gone. If nothing happens to stop this, then we are all going to starve come winter. The voice came from an elderly man standing close to Steve. He stared straight ahead, then with his head bowed, started to shuffle away. "Hold on," said Steve. "What's happened?" The old man looked at Steve. "Aye, you're a stranger here," he said. "The crops, you see. There aren't any. The birds took care of that. It will be a miracle to stop them now," as he looked up at the ever-circling mass of black which permeated the sky. "If nothing happens, we are all going to starve. We need a miracle." That evening, Steve tuned his guitar and set up his special nameplate on a small table in front of him. The corner of the room where he was going to play was, he considered, the best area for him to face his audience. The villagers were making merry, and there was a general hubbub of conversation going on, but he felt that they were somewhat quieter, more subdued than normal. The fire was roaring, and the villagers, sitting at tables or benches or even on the floor, gathered around him. He gave his guitar one strum to get their attention, and all eyes then turned to him. "Good evening," he said. "My name is Steve. Sometimes I'm called the Scarecrow, and I really don't know why." He laughed. "But the name has stuck, so I go by the name of the Scarecrow whenever I play." He paused as the room became silent. He swallowed, feeling his nerves beginning to get the best of him. "I hope you like the music." Steve coughed to clear his throat and then started to play. There was a general murmur amongst the villagers, as it was the first time they had heard his stage name. He could just make out the word Scarecrow being repeated amongst the whispering. "See the young lady with the golden hair, making her way to the English fair. She was rich, and he was poor. Soon be knocking at her door." The audience was responsive and appreciated the music, and the atmosphere changed from a depressed to a happy one. The villagers were smiling and laughing, chatting amongst themselves, many with their backs to Steve. He had to strain to understand what they were saying. Every now and again, one would look around and give him a glance, then quickly turn around again. This appeared to be the pattern, talking in groups, quick furtive glances, and then back to the conversation. One villager from the group got up, put on his cloak, walked to the door, opened it, and left. Steve took a break from singing. If he felt an uneasiness, he didn't let on, but he had already made up his mind to leave the next day. He had changed his mind. Perhaps it wasn't too bad after all in the city. At least he had his friends. And really, this sort of life, though pleasant for a day or two, didn't truly suit him. But this place, Hell's Bottom, he realized, was unusual and was something else. The door of the inn opened. The villager who had just left came back in, followed by another man clothed in richer attire. He had an air of authority about him. The villagers stood up as he walked in. He gestured for them to sit down, and a silence fell over the room. Steve didn't speak, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He felt there was something coming. "Young man," the voice boomed. "Scarecrow." "Sir," Steve was interrupted. "I am the lord of the manor house. I am not a scarecrow, sir. That is my stage name, Steve the Scarecrow," said Steve respectfully. "Do not interrupt," said the lord, raising his voice. "You are Scarecrow, and you will come with us tomorrow morning and do as I—" He looked around him. "We say." The villagers all nodded in agreement. "It is fortunate you were brought here by some—" The lord waved his arm as if searching for an appropriate word. "Magic. Yes, magic. But you may well be the savior of this village yet." Steve swallowed and tried to regain his composure. "I don't understand," Steve said. "Of course you don't, not yet," said the lord irritably, "but I will explain." The lord sat down on a chair that one of the villagers offered to him. "Now," he continued, looking at Steve directly in the eye, "we need you for a very special purpose. As you know," he paused, "this village has suffered a terrible calamity to our harvest. This is now the second year of failed crops. The devil takes many forms, Scarecrow, and the birds are a cunning disguise for his handiwork. They come down from the skies and trees, plundering our crops, eating our seeds, and ravaging the land. Oh yes, we have tried to get rid of them, but they come back time and time again. The devil does indeed wear feathers. I can't see what I can do or even help, Steve replied. But you can, said the Lord, smiling. Your music. And you, he pointed a finger. You are the Scarecrow, are you not? About to answer, Steve was interrupted again. You will play in the fields, he said abruptly. And once the birds have taken flight and you have finished your singing, you will remain there. The Lord was serious and leaned forward, looking intently at him. And if the birds come back, then you will sing again. You will stay there for as long as it takes. Days, weeks, even months. Your music is somewhat strange, but you, as the Scarecrow, will frighten off this devil. I'm not doing that, Steve raised his voice. The Lord and the villagers stood up in unison. He pointed a finger at Steve. You have no choice. You will be guarded, and I warn you again, Scarecrow, that you have no say in this matter. We have waited many months for our crops to ripen, but we have been cursed. He looked around at the villagers. Take him away, he ordered. Chain him to the tethering post in the field and bring that nameplate of his and put it around his neck. Steve's heart was pounding. He made a quick dash for the door, but some of the villagers grabbed him and held him as he struggled furiously. Let me go! Let me go! He shouted. A gag was quickly put into his mouth to silence him. The magistrate turned and faced the audience and spoke to them one more time. But before we do that, it is time for you to perform the dance for the new harvest. It's been many years that we have endured hunger, but by sunrise tomorrow we will have fresh seeds cultivated and growing in the fertile soil. Let your dance begin, and then we take it. He was carried out on the shoulders of the village men, out of the inn, across the village green, and down the cold, misty road toward the dark, dank fallow fields of rotting vegetables. An owl hooted as the darkness swallowed them up. The last sounds heard were his screams, but even those eventually faded away into the night. Mike never did see Steve again. He had the map coordinates that he received from his mobile phone, but when he arrived at the village, the one Steve had described in so much detail, it was nowhere to be seen. Mike had recognized the valley and the road leading to the village from Steve's description, but not the village itself. There was no Hell's Bottom. Instead, he found a small, modern community, no bigger than a hamlet, with a village pub, corner shop, school, and garage. When he asked around and gave a description of the village, most people shook their heads, but one person told him to go to the museum in the next town, where he might get an answer. It was there that he found a sort of answer, but it left an even bigger mystery. In his research, he found old parish records and a history of a lost medieval village that once existed on the same spot some 600 years ago. He found details of the failed harvests that had afflicted the village over a number of years. There was also a small engraving of a scarecrow in a field, which showed birds in the sky and a woman kneeling and praying as the sun was setting. He looked at it very closely through a magnifying glass that the librarian had lent him. He saw, hanging around the scarecrow's neck, a nameplate that read SEE the Scarecrow. Yes, the two letters T and V were almost faded. But it was quite clear to Mike that this was indeed his friend Steve. Mike stared at the engraving, felt faint at the realization, and his head swam. He said goodbye to the librarian and quickly made his way back to his car. Driving fast back to the city, he vowed never to go there again.